Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox, 8:56 on the East Coast and 5:56 on the West Coast. You are taking a live look at some of our cameras here across the state of Florida. We do have Clearwater, Florida, up to the top left. Bottom left is Palmetto. Top right is Anna Maria, and that is Hudson, Florida. On the bottom right, you can see just a little bit of cloud cover, but let's say this is essentially the calm before the storm. A lot to talk about here, so I do want to bring in Austen Flannery, meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Tampa, joining us now live. I know you do have some very busy days ahead of you, so we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
All right, so first off, for people who are just joining us here or are paying very close attention to each and every move, can you explain the latest forecast, kind of break it down for the storm overall, as well as the stats?
Yeah, so as far as the storm itself goes, minor adjustments overall in the main forecast overnight. The nice thing is we continue to get closer. It's not nice, but we're able to start to narrow in the location for where the storm could make landfall. So we're starting to see the cone shrink a little bit. But there is still a significant portion of the Florida West Coast that is at risk of the landfall. And of course, that landfall point is going to dictate exactly what sorts of conditions people see. So people should be continuing to prepare for a major hurricane landfall here. Now, yesterday afternoon, the storm peaked at a Category 5 intensity. Minimum pressure it reached was 897 millibars, which makes Milton the now fifth strongest storm on record in the Atlantic Basin. So that was quite terrifying, quite honestly, to watch from our perspective, but scientifically fascinating to see nonetheless. And now, of course, it has lost some of that intensity. It's very difficult for hurricanes to maintain that kind of strength for a long period of time. So Milton is back down now to a Category 4 storm. And as it begins to interact with the weather system to its north, a kind of frontal boundary that's moving sort of south and kind of stalling out, it's going to continue to see some fluctuations in the intensity. As it gets closer to the Florida Peninsula and eventually making landfall here, we do anticipate it being more like a Category 3 storm, but that's still a major hurricane. Regardless of exactly what the intensity ends up being near landfall, the impacts are going to be substantial. And this storm absolutely has the potential to be a historic storm for portions of the west coast of Florida.
And I hate to keep saying that it weakened because it makes it sound like it's not such a powerful storm, but Category 4, we're talking, winds of 145 miles per hour. Is there a possibility that it does get back to that Category 5 status before it does eventually weaken a little bit and then make landfall, or does it appear that it's going to continue on the trend that we've seen over the past several hours?
Well, I think we can certainly see additional fluctuations in the intensity forecast. As these storms kind of go through their cycles, that could mean that the storm gets a little bit stronger or it weakens a little bit. I don't think any changes would have a substantial impact on the ultimate outcome at this point for our area. So it's certainly not out of the question that it could get stronger again. It's still a very strong Category 4 hurricane, and to see it increase a few miles per hour in wind speeds wouldn't be unreasonable. But ultimately, we're going to expect some fluctuation changes one way or the other over the next day or so.
Can you talk about the importance of not necessarily just paying attention to that cone of uncertainty and the category strength? Because we know that you could see a Category 1 storm that is incredibly strong, and you can see maybe a higher end category storm that has more rain that comes with it. So kind of explain why it's important not to focus just on that.
Yeah, for a long time as scientists, we've kind of been very focused on the wind component of the storm because, the wind speeds that a hurricane produces are really unrivaled by any other weather system that exists on the planet. And so I think there's this natural inherent scientific tendency to focus on that component of things. However, that's only one piece of the impacts. And, one of the problems is if you just focus on the wind speed, you're missing all of the other impacts that could come from a storm. And a storm like this approaching the west coast at this trajectory has the potential to bring life-threatening storm surge, heavy flooding rainfall. And in the case of this storm, we're expecting both of those things to occur as well. Along and north of the center of the storm, there's going to be a substantial amount of rainfall, 10 to 15 inches, as high as isolated areas of 18 inches. And along and south, 10 to 15 feet of storm surge is the maximum. But really everywhere along the west coast, along and south of that center track, are going to see impacts from the storm surge. So just focusing on the wind definitely does not convey the full scope of the impacts that a hurricane can bring to a community.
Is it this common to have the track really not change that much over the past several days? I feel like we've been watching as the center is kind of focused there on, let's say, the Tampa area. And of course, the cone is getting smaller, but it still looks to be focused in the same area. So is that normal to see where there hasn't really been any kind of major shift?
So the forecast has been quite consistent, and that's a good thing. There certainly was higher degrees of uncertainty early on with the storm, and when you look at, say, the day 3 track error, for instance, it averages somewhere in the 100 to 150 mile range from where it actually makes landfall. But when you every storm's a little different, and when the weather patterns that are influencing storms are quite consistent and locked in, so to speak, it does make it a little bit easier to track the ultimate forecast. But as you mentioned, there's still nuance. There's still subtleties in the forecast that absolutely could adjust where the storm ultimately goes. It's certainly important not to focus on that pure where's kind of the center, if you will, of the forecast cone, because the cone represents the error and the amount of uncertainty that does exist. So there is definitely still uncertainty there. But yeah, generally speaking, we've been able to keep the forecast pretty consistent from cycle to cycle.
All right, yeah, it's a monster and historic storm there. Austen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Anything you want to add here before I let you go?
Well, I think a big thing for sure for our coastal communities especially is if you're asked to leave, you need to leave. This storm is life-threatening. And we just saw what 7 feet of storm surge can do with Helene in some areas, 7 to 10, even higher up across the Big Bend region, and still 3 to 4 feet even across Southwest Florida. And folks in Southwest Florida have Ian as a recent memory as well to look at how dangerous the storm surge piece is. So I can't stress enough that it's important to leave if you're asked to do so. And for those who are staying, ideally you're in a location that's away from the water, a well-built, sturdy structure. Ideally, you have 7 days worth of supplies. Ideally, you have multiple ways to receive weather alerts, because all of these things are going to become very challenging once the storm makes landfall. So those are definitely big things. We don't want people to be scared necessarily. We want people to be prepared. So if you're choosing to stay, we hope you're ready. And if you've been told to leave, please do so.
All right. Austen, thank you again for taking the time to join us here. Please stay safe out there. I know you are over in the Tampa area, so we appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, be safe.
Thank you.